Purpose Highway is a space for discussions that drive connections toward people's highest purpose to build a better self and a better world. Join me for Season 1, where I start to uncover stories of entrepreneurs and thinkers that are making an impact. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, guests of Scott Mason's Purpose Highway. Welcome back for another episode. And I am very proud and excited to have as a guest today, the one and only Sejal Thakkar.
Hi, Scott.
Thank
you so much. This is awesome.
It is great to have. Sejal, you are the Chief Civility Officer of Train Extra. And we're going to talk a lot about what that is and what you do. But I'm just going to dive right in. And I know you will explain what you do as you go along. So if you're listening now, we're just going to make a few assumptions, and I'm sure everything will become very clear, like mist peeling away from the top of a mountain. Sejal, you talk a lot and work with folks a lot about civility in the workplace. I'm here talking about connection to a higher purpose. Why are we in the same virtual room together? What do we have to say? What do we have in common? Why are we even speaking to each other?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for yourself, but I can tell you I'm a total huge fan of yours. So that's why I'm here. I mean, any invitation I get from you, sign me up. If I can be in the same room, whether it's virtual or not, with Scott Mason, I'm all over it. Seriously.
Well, that's good enough for me, but I think that's just the beginning. I think you just said that to flatter.
Hey, flattery will get me everywhere, and I know that. But I, from the minute that I've met you, Scott, I felt that we are very much like-minded and that we connect on, I think we're both going, and this goes to just, from the minute I met you, I felt this about you. And that's why I think you're a wonderful speaker, but that you're out there actually doing what you can to make this world a better place. Right. And I've been sort of a social justice champion my whole life, for as long as I can remember. And I've gotten pretty good at picking out people that I think are also very good and really have that purpose. And so that's where I think that you and I have connected from the beginning.
It's interesting, though, because you are an attorney, as am I. Mm-hmm. Now, rather than that being a reason for us to hate each other, we have used it as a place from which we connect with each other. And you mentioned a few minutes ago that you have been kind of a social justice warrior from birth. Why then did you choose the career of law, particularly because in the past 30 or 40 years, that career has largely become associated with being part of huge law firms, making massive amounts of money, and not giving a darn about anyone except those companies that bring in the most billable hours?
Yeah, I've just through my own personal experiences, I've always been passionate about moving the needle on social justice. And for me, all that really means, Scott, is that I believe that everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And so that's sort of the goal. That's sort of my purpose. And I do my part in whatever way I can to contribute to that goal. And so I think that today, with everything that's going on in today's world, that we each need to do our part, whatever that is, to sort of push that needle so that everybody gets social injustice. I mean, you look at just this year, the lens on racial injustice has brought so much attention to the prejudice and discrimination that are present. It just rooted it out. It's not like this is a new issue. This has been something that's been there for a long time. And so I think we're at a really good tipping point right now. And so I appreciate you inviting me onto this podcast, because I use every opportunity I can to get people inspired to do the same.
A lot of people that I know, particularly during this crisis, but even before, particularly those who work in corporate America, but even those that work in other sectors that I've worked in, such as government and nonprofit, might say to people like you, or they might say it to each other behind closed doors, the world is a tough place. All this stuff about civility, diversity, social justice warriors, what does that have? What does that offer me? All it does is it creates a regulatory burden. It makes me feel shamed for being a man, for being white, for being this, that, and the other. It doesn't have anything to do with my ability to develop my business. And in fact, if anything, all this concern about other people detracts from the bottom line and my own ability to scrabble my way to the top. So why should I be listening to anyone who's going to be getting in my way?
Yeah, no. And believe me, I have dealt with this resistance. It is not easy to overcome. But I'll tell you, here's a simple way of looking at what you just said is that each and every single one of us has different beliefs. We have different values, different preconceived notions that we bring to the table, different personalities, right? So for organizations, I mean, really, your ability to create an environment where you've got people that are all different from each other, that are unique in their own way, to be able to come together and collaborate so that your organization can be successful. I mean, we spent a lot of time. I mean, I've gone through the grind. So have you. I know we both have, where we worked hours on end around the weekend, after hours. And those days where now people are spending 50% more time in collaborative environments now versus you sitting at your own desk. So organizations have to create an environment where people can communicate with each other, when they can collaborate together, when they can resolve conflict together. And you have to create that culture of psychological safety. If you don't, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. The number of lawsuits that have been filed, that's only what's reported. We know that 75% of people don't even report these issues. So you're talking about bottom line. I mean, your bottom line gets hit a lot more when you have a toxic work culture versus you actually putting in the time to empower your employees. And that's really my focus. My training is all centered in around how do we empower employees to be part of the solution. I think organizations have made it very competitive. You know, instead of making the culture collaborative, they've made it more competitive. And so this goes against really where they're trying to get to. And so the focus has changed. I mean, the times have changed, the technology has changed, the diversity has changed. So organizations also need to change. And that's really what's going on right now, is that when these organizations were initially built, they were built with a certain set of people in mind, and that has evolved. So organizations also need to evolve.
What does collaborative mean? Everyone uses that word. It's a buzzword, collaborative versus competitive. I want my people to collaborate, I might say, as a CEO or a senior VP or whatever C-level position I have, or as an entrepreneur who owns my own business. I want them to collaborate so that they can compete against each other to bring out the best performance within the organization, as well as to compete against those out in the business world or other various sectors that might have spaces adjacent to those of my organization that I want to vanquish and conquer. Yeah. What's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, I've worked for law firms my whole career up until I started up my own business. And I joke about this sometimes when I say, man, now that I'm on my own, I feel like I'm in a more collaborative environment than I ever did working for other people with other people. Mm-hmm. And as sad as that is, that's a reality for a lot of people. So when I look at collaboration, I'm talking about, for example, right now, the collaboration that you and I and Oleg did, right? I mean, we came at it with a shared goal. We had a shared goal in mind. We brought different things to the table, and there were bumps along the way, like every collaboration, but we came at it with a problem-solving mentality towards a shared goal. That's what I talk about when there's a collaborative environment for organization, is that we are bringing all of our unique selves to work, but we can all agree on what that shared goal is, and that we're going to involve, rather than problem escalation, we're going to do a problem solving approach to let's work together. And we're not always going to agree, and that's okay. But here's what we do when we disagree or when there's a misunderstanding. Here's how we keep moving forward towards that shared goal. So as an attorney, what I saw with organizations, that they were doing more cutthroat type competition, but within the organization as well as outside of the organization. Of course, every organization has to be competitive to a certain extent to make profitability and hit those numbers. That's different, though. What I'm talking about is within the culture itself. So here's an example, right? Where you have leaders leaders, unfortunately, and I've seen this and I know you have, I've heard your stories, is where oftentimes leaders use that competitive approach to the point where it gets to be bullying type behavior in the workplace rather than being a role model and tolerating the behavior that we expect from others, which is we're not going to treat each other with disrespect, or we're going to treat each other regardless of whether we agree or not. We're going to be respectful towards each other. So adopting that problem solving mentality is one part of it, but then also making sure you have marginalized groups as part of that decision making process. If you don't have diversity at the table where these decisions are being made, then you're not going to create a solution or an environment that's going to be welcoming for everybody. Right? So it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. And so I don't want to make it sound like, oh, you can just show up and do it. It takes a lot of work, but I don't think you have any other choice right now.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, that you say that. One question I have, and it's based on an experience I had in a particular workplace that I lived in for a while. Mm-hmm. There was someone who was very toxic in that organization. She was at a very, very high level, and she brought a lot of trauma, and pain to pretty much everyone who worked around her. And she inhibited the organization from being able to really move forward in ways that it needed to move forward. Now, eventually, she got another position. I don't know that anyone really begged and pleaded her to stay. And there was a healing process that happened after she left. And that part of that healing process was due to the sheer level of disrespect that she had brought into the workplace. At least arguably, the staff overcompensated in the other direction. Mm-hmm. People were so respectful of each other's feelings. They were so polite, so civil, that it almost felt like people couldn't disagree because of this tacit agreement, or people couldn't be honest with each other. Or if they were honest with each other, they said it with such tenderness and such concern for assuaging any possible feeling states that the other employees might have, that a lot of conflicts that needed to be resolved never were fully able to be brought to the surface. So is there such a thing as creating a workplace that is too collaborative or that is too civil? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the word civil in and of itself, right, really is a question about what does that mean, for organizations. What does civility mean to your organization? So that is something just like any of the other core values that you decide, diversity, inclusion, integrity, whatever core value you choose, you have to do the same thing with civility. You have to define that for your organization and make sure that it's clear what you mean by civility. Now, when I talk about incivility happening in organizations, we're talking about a spectrum of behavior, Scott. We're talking about things like being rude, unprofessional, dismissive, unwelcoming, abusive, bullying, all the way to your illegal harassment and discrimination. That's uncivil behavior that happens. And then on the other side of that is also your unintentional behavior, like microaggressions that happen from a space of you having these unconscious biases and then not being aware of it. So now you're taking that out without even knowing it. It's happening unintentionally. It's coming out in your words and your actions against people around you. So that could also contribute to uncivil behavior. The key, though, is to recognize, to make sure that you define what is uncivil behavior for your organization. So some of that stuff is going to be zero tolerance, right? Like there is no reason to be abusive or bullying in the workplace. There's no reason to be discriminating against somebody. There's no reason to harass. So some of those behaviors you want to characterize as zero tolerance. But the rest of those behaviors, you want to make sure you understand what you mean by uncivil behaviors and that everybody in the organization also understands that. Because then the next step is, after you've defined it, the next step is communicating that to everybody, right? And making sure that everybody understands what is expected of them. And then when either they have witnessed somebody being uncivil or they're a victim of that, they also need to know what to do in those situations, right? Where should they go? Who do they report it to? Who's going to be, investigating that complaint? So legally, there's requirements that you have to meet there. But I think I don't think you can get to a place if you do this right, because the whole point is you're trying to create a psychologically safe environment. so that employees, when they're dealing with uncivil behavior, feel safe enough to speak up about it. So it's not necessarily being overly polite or being overly respectful. It's being able to say, hey, you know what? You were standing too close to me, or you made that joke and maybe you thought it was funny, but because of my culture, it isn't. So you're actually being able to have more of these conversations that we haven't been having. So you're actually doing the opposite. I like to say you're calling people in. You're letting people know about your own boundaries, what is violating your sort of safety in the work environment. And so it's actually going to create an environment where people are going to speak up more, not less.
What would you say to those, particularly in times like these where there's a huge amount of cultural and political polarization, who would argue that what you're really trying to do, less so much with the general concept of across the board civility, but with regards to diversity and inclusion, attempting to impose a political agenda on the workplace?
Yeah,
What
and
if
that's. Sorry.
answer that actually? Go ahead. I would love to hear you finish, or just
And this is
jump in.
No, it's a great question. That's why, because I think, there's been a lot you've seen. There's been an executive order out by the current administration banning certain terms to be used in the diversity and inclusion trainings. And in fact, as of right now, a lot of companies are not even doing the diversity and inclusion training because they don't want to violate any executive order. So it's a great question. And again, I think it's very important to clarify that the work that, a lot of the diversity and inclusion experts out there are doing, I'm doing more of the civility. That's just the angle that I've decided to go about it. But really, there is no political agenda. If you're doing this right and you're doing it for the right reason, it's really about creating a culture of dignity and respect. And that is regardless of, and I say this all the time, it's not about favoring one group over another. It's actually the opposite of that. It's that we're all human beings and we, at a very minimum, deserve that level of dignity and respect. So some of these diversity and inclusion trainings, they go into deeper topics, right? Because we need to go into those deeper topics. Those topics are very important. And so that's why I always say, have civility be a separate core value than diversity and inclusion. It's not replacing those. It's not taking over those. It's just a different angle, a different aspect that I felt as a lawyer. What I saw from organizations was that they were not empowering their employees. And by empowering their employees, I mean, I think for all of us, we want to go to an environment at work where we can bring ourselves to work, that we are in a collaborative environment, that we believe our work is a part of the shared goal and mission. So we see our part, our work is valued, right? So that's the piece that I'm really sort of working on with organizations right now, is how do we empower employees so they understand what their role is in this solution. But there's no political agenda, and I think this is why the misinformation that goes on right now is tragic, because it sends this message that all the D&I experts are out there trying to, knock, white people. And that's not the goal. It's really, we want to get everybody to the same level playing field, right? So that we can all be in a safe work environment.
Why do you personally care about any of this so much? What's in it for you personally? Yeah.
And, I do this because what I've gone through personally in my life, I've dealt with discrimination and bullying growing up, and that's one of the reasons why I became an attorney, was because I wanted to, it sounds so cliche, but I really wanted to help people. That's why I went into it. And it was such a learning experience. I've had to do so much work, Scott, along this way, to work through my own biases, my own self-limiting beliefs, to really be able to do the work that I do. And what I learned was, having been bullied, so I was on the victim side, and then the coins completely flipped. Now I'm representing people being accused of harassing and discriminating. So you have to really learn a lot to be able to do that, to be able to be effective at what you're doing. And what I saw was, here I was thinking that I was going to see all these bad people. Don't get me wrong. There's always bad people. And so I always put those people in the side because we need to deal with those individuals in the work environment, right? So there's people that are consciously out there, prejudiced and harassment. We know that. We see that in the news all the time. But what I saw more often than not, and really what pushes me to do this work, is that a lot of people just didn't have the tools or the skills to deal with differences, and a lot of that is part of our unconscious bias again, our preconceived notions because of what we've experienced in our own lives. And so I just feel like by educating people and by talking about these topics and doing these podcasts, that if I can touch one person or help them look at it from a different perspective, which is what we need to do. That's all we need to do is shift our perspective and our mindset, and we can make such a significant change. Right. And so that's my goal. That's what drives me every day is like, man, if one person listening to this podcast is like, wow, I'm going to take a look at myself and do some work on it, then that's my goal.
What if I am a manager with a company or I am the owner of a business and I like to think of myself as a fundamentally good-hearted and sensitive person? And I'll use myself as an example. I've got a loud voice. I am not a person of tiny height or physical stature. I project. And, there was a company that I worked for where they did 360-degree reviews. And I remember one of the things that I was most devastated by was some anonymous feedback that I got. Scott is someone with a big voice and a big presence and a big personality. Those are wonderful things. But it can intimidate and create challenges for those who might be smaller in physical stature and smaller in self-confidence levels. And, that created an opportunity for me to self-reflect, but it was a challenge because a lot of the times, I felt like essentially the feedback I was giving was to shrink myself and to suddenly find a different voice other than mine and to not be the expressive hands flying around Scott Mason that everyone, especially me, knew and loved. And other people might find that in different ways about themselves. The other thing too is sometimes you're so frustrated as a manager working for government. I dealt with the civil service class where you couldn't get rid of them for anything. And sometimes there would be moments where I was angry. No one ever taught me how to be angry in a way that was quote unquote civil, especially when there was nothing I could do to punish anyone. It's not like I could terminate anyone for showing up late every day for a month. So I had to go through a year's worth of litigation. What do you say to people like that who might feel like what you're doing is saying you can't be yourself? You can't address anger, frustration, challenges in the workplace, or even be who you might be without somehow being censored or being forced to be inauthentic in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, look, we want people to be who they are authentically, but that means also being vulnerable and understanding that, okay, you know what? I do have an anger management issue and I have to then do the work to address that issue. Or I do have these unconscious biases because that's just how our brain is. It's normal. And this is the information I've received. So that's why I've formed these beliefs. But now that I'm aware of what those are, I can do the work. It's unbelievable what we can accomplish when we accept responsibility for ourselves, right? So it's coming to understand, going and doing the work to self-reflect and figure out why you are the way you are and who you are and what can you do to improve moving forward, right? So it's beneficial for each one of us to take that on and do the work. But at the end of the day, going back to your question, there is no question about it. If you've got issues when you're at work, we're looking at a community. We're looking at it collectively. So absolutely, there are going to be things that you cannot say, you cannot do when you come to work. And you need to accept that. And if you're not a part of an environment that's not going to be tolerated, then you need to move on and find another job. But that's exactly the level where it needs to get to, Scott, where organizations have to say, we are not going to tolerate. So I will say that over and over again. We are not going to tolerate anything but dignity and respect for all. And if that doesn't work for you, take a hike, buddy. Go get another job, because in our organization, this is and that's what we need to get to really make a difference.
What if I'm afraid? What if, for instance, I work for a nonprofit where budgets are limited and the development person, for instance, who's bringing in the money is the person who's creating holy heck everywhere they go? Or what if I own a small business and I have 3 staff members, and letting someone go and then finding someone to replace them and then training that replacement up could literally put our cash flow at risk? What do you say to folks like that?
Yeah.
And how do they begin to handle those sorts of binds?
But this is it comes back to, so look, if I use the example of when we're taking care of our bodies, right? We know that we're going to have a healthier life. So what are things that when we're taking care of our own body, what are things we want to make sure? We want to make sure we have a regular diet, right? Whatever that looks like for yourself, but it's not going to be 20 Oreo cookies like I did this past weekend. But you want to have a regular,
we won't talk about that.
balanced diet. Right? You want to make sure you exercise, and then you want to make sure you rest. Same thing for an organization, right? Regardless of the size of your organization, you need to worry about your culture, and your culture is made up of your people. So you have to take a look at who are all the people within your organization, and how do you leverage what are their skills, what their values, what are their talents that they're bringing to the workforce. So you have to leverage all of that. The second part of that, Scott, is also, aside from leveraging all of that, you want to provide a safe work environment. We don't want to put our employees at risk. So creating that safe work environment requires some effort. Now, depending on what your issues are, that might require less than other organizations. And then you want to provide, I think what's really important too, is that especially right now, I mean, it's always, but more so now than ever, providing a work-life balance or some sort of, empathy for what everybody's going on right now. So when you're looking at a leader, right? I tell leaders all the time, look, regardless of the size of your organization or how many people you have or where you do the business, you have to start the culture at the beginning. When you have one employee, you need to start setting up that culture. And then we know that culture of respect starts at the top. The example you just shared about this person that had gone on and bullied employees and gotten away with it, she created a toxic culture because that was tolerated. That was allowed. And everybody knew about it probably and did nothing about it, right? I bet you, and again, I don't know this person, or I don't know specifically the experience that you went through, Scott, but even without knowing it, I can make some assumptions about what probably went on, right? So leaders have to make sure that they make it very clear to the employees what they're going to tolerate, right?
Yeah. I think the one final question I have about this is, what would you suggest to a leader in terms of emotionally processing and then moving forward if they are told that they have behaviors that are, that are inappropriate, that are creating these sort of challenges in the workplace? How would you get them to a place where they can begin to confront it?
Yeah, I think leaders are at a very challenging time right now. Aside from the pandemic, which we're dealing with all kinds of new issues, the laws are changing. I mean, the COVID related laws are literally changing on a daily basis. You've got city, county, state ordinances, federal, so leaders are in a really, really tough situations. I'll tell you what I've seen that I feel like it's a silver lining coming out of all of this is that I'm seeing leaders actually say, I don't know the answer to that, and really be transparent and be vulnerable and get help. Here's the thing. I've been doing employment law since 2003, and I'm seeing issues where I'm like, I have no idea how we would handle that. I need to get help. And I've been doing this for a while. So I would tell leaders out there, get help. You don't have to go through this crisis alone. There are plenty of people that can support you. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. Right. Yeah. And take accountability. I think leaders, when they have to lead, right? They have to go through the muddy waters themselves and do the work on themselves. And as people do it, I mean, we can come up with so many stories where we've seen leaders embrace their flaws and come out of it and become rock star people that people look up to now and talk about, right? So you and I are on that journey together. So we can share that.
As a metaphorical matter, I have a vision of creating or being part of a space that creates a planet's worth of heroes going on the journey of a lifetime together. If you are one of those heroes going on that journey, what does the end of that heroic quest look like for you?
That's a great question. Wow.
I like to end with a bang.
Honestly, Scott, I feel really blessed. I have to say, I'm wearing a lot of different hats right now in my life, and I keep adding my own titles to my name. It's hilarious, but
it's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
I know, right? But I'll tell you what, I'm happy. I feel very grateful to be able to do my work right now. I'm surrounding myself with awesome people like you and just other people that are on this journey together. It feels really fulfilling right now. And I just want to keep doing what I'm doing and just help create the positive change. Again, just like how you are as well. So I'm just grateful that every day that I get to do this. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I feel right now inside. I'm full.
Look, there is no right or wrong answer to that particular question. Candor, authenticity, and keeping it real is the only thing that you need to bring to the table when that question is asked, and you just did it. Sejal, people who watch this or listen to it are going to be very curious about how they can find out more about you. Talk to us a little bit about where we can look you up, what you do on social media, any projects you have coming up. Tell us all about yourself.
Yeah, no, I'm going to keep it really simple. I think I'm on LinkedIn. That's the only social media platform I'm on right now. So I really am. I say this in every podcast that I do. I believe in sharing information and good information. And so if you'd like to follow sort of the work that I'm doing all around civility, follow me on LinkedIn. You can get a lot of good resources there. And then the only other place you can find other information on me would be my website. So you can go to Train Extra. It's TrainXtra.com. And I put up all my, if you want to listen to more of the stuff I'm doing under my LinkedIn profile, all of the podcasts that I've done is on there. But I think otherwise, you know what? I'm here as a resource. So even if it's something that's sort of outside of what I'm doing, I welcome people to come to me if I can help in any way to introduce. I think we really need to. There's a lot going on in the world, and I feel like we need to support each other better. So if there's anything I can do for you, don't hesitate to reach out.
And I've just got to add a little endorsement at the end. As you know, I follow you on LinkedIn. Your content is terrific. You do a lot of presentations, and literally you've done them before international audiences. You're doing great work. I want you to keep it up. Reach out to Sejal. She is the person that can give you that information and support that Sejal, you yourself were talking about a few minutes ago. There's nothing wrong with feeling that vulnerability. And like you said, Sejal, that can help us all as leaders go to a place beyond what we ever imagined. Everyone, thank you for listening or watching this episode of Purpose Highway. Sejal, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Join our community today at purposehighway.com and subscribe to get notified when new episodes go live. Scott Mason, checking out.